Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special live episode of the Ethicast. I'm your host, Bill Coffin, and joining me is Ethisphere Chief Strategy Officer Erica Salmon Byrne as we discuss the Department of Justice's update to its evaluation of corporate compliance programs. This is the Ethicast. Hi, everyone. Earlier today, we received an update from the Department of Justice on its evaluation of corporate compliance programs, or ECCP. For those who are new to this, the ECCP is a set of guiding principles used to determine the effectiveness of a corporate compliance program when determining whether or not to prosecute a company for wrongdoing. Basically, this is what the DOJ uses to figure out how much blame a company should share when one of its employees breaks the law. In a nutshell, the ECCP helps prosecutors answer three fundamental questions. One, is the corporation's compliance program well designed? Two, does the program have the resources and support it needs to do its job? And three, does the program work in practice? The ECCP was last updated in March 2023, and any update to it has important implications for corporate ethics and compliance officers. And this update contains important language around the governance of artificial intelligence within business operations, as well as language on speak-up culture, anti-retaliation, whistleblower protection, and a whole lot more. Erica, this strikes me as an important update, even by previous standards, so I'm dying to get your insights on some of these changes.
So, Bill, it's certainly much more of an update than we were expecting. Anytime the department is going to do an update like this, we generally see some level of signaling coming earlier in the year. And so, we have seen a lot out of the department already this year. We've seen the update to the whistleblower pilot program and the guidance that came out around that. And now, of course, we have the different local U.S. attorneys' offices that are putting out their own whistleblower programs that are sort of in line with the guidance that came out of the department. We knew AI was coming, right? I mean, that without question, they were going to have to figure out a way to update the ECCP for AI. But I actually want to talk about AI last, Bill, because there is so much more in this update than I ever expected. And I feel like everyone's going to read the AI piece and be like, okay, AI updates. And then you're going to miss some of the really interesting additions that they have made to this foundational, piece of guidance. And for all of you compliance officers out there who are listening in, there's a lot of stuff in here that's going to help y'all. And so Bill and I are going to break it down. Yeah. We've also done a text compare. We're going to run a webinar on Wednesday. Don't miss the chance to make some hay with what the department has given you.
Yeah, most definitely. And the side by side we've already done. There is a dramatic increase in the occurrence of certain words like data and that sort of thing. So it's really a substantive update for sure. And before we started going, Erica, you and I are having a geek moment over this, just because there's so much to talk about.
There's so much to talk about, Bill.
It's so impactful. Yeah. So let me get into the first big piece I'd love to talk about, which is on effectiveness of the reporting mechanism. We see updated and new language on speak-up culture, namely some important questions. Does the company encourage and incentivize reporting of potential misconduct or violation of company policy? Conversely, does the company use practices that tend to chill such reporting? And how does the company assess employees' willingness to report misconduct? Erica, how important is this language for the advancement of speak-up culture and helping companies close what we call the speak-up gap, that delta between the degree to which employees say they're willing to report misconduct and the rate by which they actually report misconduct when they see it?
Yep. This is important, Bill, and it should definitely be read in the context of the whistleblower pilot program guidance, right? So, and we've written a lot about the whistleblower pilot program guidance, but if you look at what the department said in that particular piece of guidance, they talk about they tried to balance the financial incentive, quite frankly, that they are providing employees to come forward when they believe that there has been misconduct that has occurred, with the voluntary self-disclosure credit that they have offered to companies who bring issues to them. And so they actually, in the whistleblower pilot program, they've actually carved out a window where if you know something, even if a whistleblower ends up coming to the department, if you get in there within 120 days, you're going to still get that presumption of voluntary self-disclosure. So it was really the department's effort to kind of balance the incentives that it was offering. And what we see here in the ECCP guidance update is a similar effort to encourage companies to invest in their cultures of compliance to look at the ways in which they are setting up their speak up cultures, to look importantly at the ways in which they are measuring the effectiveness of those programs and those processes, right? So, do you know that your program is working? Are you relying on a hotline when we know that's not the way that most employees raise concerns? How are you addressing and treating employees around investigations? There's some strong language in here around non-retaliation, both awareness building and what goes in your policy. And so it is clear that the government is really leaning in on trying to make sure that companies are setting up programs that will actually allow employees to raise concerns so that companies can address those concerns early.
So I'd love to drill down on this anti-retaliation piece, because this is something that really, it mattered to me quite a lot, given the fact that I did so much work on our report earlier this year about the speak up gap.
Yep.
And so separately, under the commitment to whistleblower protection and anti-retaliation, and I had to cringe a little bit. I hate seeing the word whistleblower. I prefer upstander, but anyway, I'll take what I can get.
Yep.
But under that section, though, we see new language on how companies protect those who do speak up. Namely, does the company have an anti-retaliation policy?
Yep.
Does the company train employees on both internal anti-retaliation policies and external anti-retaliation policies and whistleblower protection law?
Yep.
To the extent that the company disciplines employees involved in misconduct, are employees who reported internally treated differently than others involved in misconduct who did not? And then finally, does the company train employees on internal reporting systems as well as external whistleblower programs and regulatory regimes?
Yep.
A lot of great language here.
Yep.
I have to ask, though, this is kind of my cynical side now. It's great to see this language. Could this section have gone a little farther in stressing how critical it is to have robust programs to protect those who speak up, especially when, by our own data, when we look at, half the people, 93% of people say they're willing to speak up, only half actually do.
Yep.
And when you talk about the ones who don't, again and again, they say the big reason why they didn't is because of they were afraid of anti-retaliation, or they're afraid that the organization won't actually live by the anti-retaliation policy as written. So how do you put all this in its proper context?
Yeah, the opportunity that I think the department missed a little bit in this particular update, Bill, to go to your point about, did it go far enough, is they really could have leaned into the manager piece, right? So what we know from our data set is managers absolutely are critical in both preventing retaliation and not critical in committing it, but often complicit in situations where retaliation has occurred. And so when we see a situation where an employee is raising a concern and says that they have experienced something negative as a result of it, more often than not, it's not what we here in the States would call, illegal retaliation. It's not tangible employment action, right? It's something subtler than that, but is nonetheless equally chilling. So that's part of the reason why I appreciated seeing the reference to external whistleblower protections, because the EU whistleblower directive actually has really, really good language on the kind of ostracism and social impacts and things like that employees indicate they experienced as a result of raising their hand. So if you ask employees who say they've experienced retaliation what they've experienced, more often than not, what you hear from them is you hear something like, I stopped getting invited to lunch. People started looking at me funny. I got pulled off the good projects, right? It's that kind of more subtle, you're not one of us kind of chilling effect that ends up destroying, honestly, your speak up culture. And the EU whistleblower directive has really good language on this. So for somebody out there who's listening to you and I talk about this and says, well, I don't really know how to update my policy, I strongly suggest you pull up the EU whistleblower directive or any of our guidance that we've written off of it and utilize that as a model, because it's going to get to the kinds of things that employees say they experience when it comes to this sort of retaliatory activity. So I do think that the government could have put a little bit more into this on specifically educating managers, not just employees, but managers about the impact of retaliation, the ways in which you can prevent retaliation, the types of retaliation that tend to happen. That, I think, is the opportunity here. I do really appreciate the fact that they emphasized having a policy. I very much appreciate the fact that they emphasized talking about not just, an internal company policy, but sort of the landscape. And that, I think, probably plays into, Bill, some of what we've seen come out of the SEC's enforcement around pretaliatory is the word they're using for it. language in some of their settlement agreements, right? So this idea that the SEC has been going after companies who put language in that somehow limits the way that a whistleblower, potential whistleblower, can talk to the government. So some of the latest ones that we've seen, the SEC has said, you can't say that the only way you can talk to the government is if the government comes to you, right? Like that is not allowed under our frameworks. And so this is really the department kind of leaning into that and saying, yep, no, really not allowed. You need to educate on all of the various ways in which, people can be speaking up. Now, let's call a spade, Bill. There is no company on earth that is going to incentivize employees to speak up the way the whistleblower program is going to incentivize an employee to speak up, right? Like companies are not going to start throwing cash at their people, nor should they, quite frankly. We had this conversation when the SEC implemented the whistleblower office, right? All of a number of companies in the space and a number of companies said like, oh, should we start offering cash if you raise your hand? And the broad decision that the community made, and I still think it was the right decision, was no, right? We're not going to try to compete with giving somebody a percentage of whatever they recover in the event of criminal activity. Instead, I think what companies need to do in response to this update on this point in particular is really thoroughly investigate their processes, right? How easy have we made it for people to raise their hand? How many different channels have we given them? How easy have we made it for those channels to tell us what's happening inside the business? Have we reviewed the function of those channels, right? Have we tried to use them ourselves? Like, hey, I'm going to text the hotline from my cell phone and see if it actually gets to where it's supposed to be. That kind of monitoring of your systems is a critically important piece of what the government is looking for clearly in the ECCP, and will also strengthen making sure that all of your channels are open and ready to receive whatever might be coming in.
Now, in the section around how companies identify and manage risks that could potentially impact their ability to comply with the law, we finally get this really, to my mind, a pretty substantial update that addresses finally the topic of artificial intelligence. Now, so far, I've been reading all the questions that are in the update point by point. This one I'm not going to because there's 10 whole questions. So we'll be here until tomorrow if I read it all. But I think the keystone of it is, how does the company assess the potential impact of new technologies such as AI in its ability to comply with criminal laws? And as it goes on, it asks things like, how do you incorporate that understanding in your ERM strategy, your enterprise risk management strategy? What are potential negative consequences from using this? What's the baseline for human interaction with AI? How do you train people around it? I mean, it's a pretty, I think, full discussion as much as we can have from a regulatory perspective on this topic. So this is a pretty extensive piece of guidance, I think, especially when we look at the detailed definition of AI that is also provided in a footnote in this document as well. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that, because there's a lot there in terms of what the government considers to be AI. This topic has been everywhere this year. What are we to make of this guidance around it from an E&C perspective, especially as we look for what the future holds next year?
So couple things on this risk management piece, Bill, before I get to the AI component of it specifically. So one of the things to emphasize for people listening in is the government has really leaned in on a couple of things as it pertains to risk. One is you've got to be proactive, right? There's a lot of language in here about proactive versus reactive risk assessments. How regularly are you revisiting your risk assessments? How are you keeping on top of emerging risks, whether AI or otherwise? How are you incorporating newly acquired companies into your risk management process, right? There's a lot of emphasis that's been placed in this document on ongoing, regular work around your risk management and risk assessment processes. The second thing I would say is the DOJ also, for the first time in my memory at least, calls out the question of whether your risk assessment and your other risk management activities are taking lessons learned, not just from stuff that's happened to you, but from stuff that has happened to companies in your space. And Bill, you and I have been like on a soapbox on this one for years, right?
It's so
for
big.
Years. Do not let somebody else's crisis go unmined. Like, take it, do a tabletop. Could it happen here? What would it look like, right? That's now in the ECCP. So for all of you out there who are like, oh yeah, I'll get to that later. No, get to it now. right? Get to it now. Look at what's happening to companies in your space and say, how do I take this and turn it into an exercise that allows me to use somebody else's misfortune to make my program better? It's what the government expects clearly in the document, redlined in our text compare. So, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And is definitely something that I hope companies will take seriously and use to make their programs better, because there aren't that many ways, Bill, as you and I are fond of saying, of people being people. And so if somebody else's people are being people, you can use that to figure out whether or not your people are going to be people in that same way or something very similar. So on the AI piece in particular, I think there's a couple interesting things about the way that they've treated AI in this document. There's the element of both risk and opportunity, right? So, asking about the how risky AI is for your part of the business. How are you going to mitigate those risks? How are you going to make sure that the data that AI is producing isn't biased, right? Isn't being used for improper means, is accurate, right? There's a couple of references in the document to making sure that your AI generated information is accurate, and how are you going to make sure that it's accurate? But it does acknowledge definitely that this new technology, new and emerging technology, is also an opportunity from a compliance perspective. And so it really wraps this new and exciting technology in a familiar wrapper that we've all known for years, which is, what are the risks and how are you going to mitigate those risks? And how do you know that those risk mitigation activities are working? And so it's that same formula of designing it well, implementing it effectively, and checking on it, right? We know how to do this. We do. I mean, we might be doing it on computers, but we know how to do this. So, so that was one of the other things that stood out to me. I also, was struck by one particular addition to the ECCP that comes, from my perspective at least, directly out of a comment that Matt Galvin made to me during the chat that he and I had at our Global Ethics Summit in the spring. And Matt said in the course of that chat, if you wind up in front of the department and your sales team has beautiful AI-enabled dashboards and your compliance team is operating on spreadsheets, the government's going to want to know why. And so in this document, we now have a separate standalone bullet that says proportionate resource allocation. And I am going to quote this one, Bill. How do the assets, resources, and technology available to compliance and risk management compare to those available elsewhere in the company? Is there an imbalance between the technology and resources used by the company to identify and capture market opportunities and the technology and resources used to detect and mitigate risks? If that's not sales has AI-enabled dashboards and compliance is on spreadsheets, I don't know what it is, but to me, that's a fancier way of saying what Matt said at the summit. And so that is in there, right? That is in there. The government is looking to see whether you have used these new technologies solely for business purposes in terms of, being able to make more money, or have you also used them to enable the company to make money the right way?
Yeah. And the thing I love about this all so very much is that, to the point you mentioned before, it's not just that the stress on proactive versus reactive risk management is nestled entirely within the guidance on AI. They make that point separately, right? So that's a meta point on all things AI and otherwise. But you can't read that language and the AI language and fail to make the connection that there is an expectation here that, with AI, we don't get a chance to watch fire get invented very often, right?
You're right.
And so we do. So it's like, look, there's power and there's promise and there's peril. So just make sure you manage these things appropriately. The DOJ is watching. And I thought that language was a really great way to kind of cover the impossible level of nuance yet to be discovered around this technology. But they lay down some really fantastic groundwork for how we can look at this. I expect there'll be further or more closely defined language on this in the future. But for now, I think what we have is a pretty solid, opening statement for, we need to treat this stuff responsibly, make use of it to advance your business. Absolutely do. But be mindful of how it can go wrong and build those processes and procedures, have the adequate resources in place to make sure that this fire isn't going to burn your house down.
Yeah. Yep. So. Absolutely.
So we're just about at time, but I just want to ask you one more time. You had mentioned a couple things about risk assessment and some other topics. This update is chock full. It's an embarrassment of riches, frankly.
It really is.
Interesting pieces. Yeah. Are there any other pieces you'd like to touch on real briefly before we sign off?
Oh my goodness, Bill, how much time do I have? Okay, I'm going to talk really fast. Because I know we are coming to time. And of course, there's going to be so much more to be written and said about this particular update, but I do want to touch on a couple of quick things. The first is there is specifically an addition in the policies section of the guidance on how do you know whether your employees can access the policies, right? What have you done to check to make sure that the written standards that you've put out into the world are actually things that people are using? And so we, Bill, you and I have been talking about click metrics and testing your policy platforms and measuring employee policy access and culture studies for years. And, that is now in the guidance, specifically something. It's not enough to put the policy out there. You have to actually make sure that people can use it. So that's one thing to call out. The other thing, a couple of things to call out here are one is in the section on funding and resources, which of course is a big thing that we talk about a lot. There's specifically now a question of whether the company has a mechanism to measure the commercial value of investments in compliance and risk management. So, hey, business benefit of a control function right there in the ECCP. That is a big deal. And then the third thing that I wanted to touch on, and again, I apologize that I keep quoting this, but there's so much here. That same section on autonomy and resources in the text, before you get into the actual little questions themselves, there has been an addition that Bill just made my heart sing. So the question about the sufficiency of the personnel and resources within the compliance function, numeral 1 now reads sufficient qualifications, seniority, and stature, both actual and perceived. Org charts send messages.
Yes, they do.
So I was super excited to see that.
Yeah.
It's and again, sort of, emphasis on the seniority side of things in particular. But that was a really exciting update to see because, again, if you have a compliance function that is buried within your organization, then I don't think you can say that that particular function has perceived stature that you would want that function to have within the eyes of your employees, and now clearly within the eyes of the government. So that was an exciting addition to see to the document. So,
indeed.
But yeah, Bill, there's so much more. There's how often are you checking on your third parties? There's a bunch of changes that they've made to the M&A section around how quickly are you integrating newly acquired assets. So I'm really glad that we already have a webinar on the books to talk about this more with our community. So for those of you who want to join and talk more about what the department has done here, please join us on Wednesday. We will be gathering for a conversation there. And then for anybody who's out there who's part of the Bella community, and you guys want to join a Bella only virtual roundtable to have even more of a conversation, we're going to do that on Friday, because there are 107 changes to this document, Bill, and they're not all related to AI. So there's a lot for us to talk about, a lot for us to mine here, and a lot for us to think through as it pertains to the ways in which the people in our community can use these changes to really make effective improvements to their programs inside their own organizations.
Indeed. Well, Erica, thank you so much for providing your insight on this ECCP update. These things tend to generate an intense amount of interest, so it's great to provide some quick perspective on what this really means for folks in the ethics economy. So again, thank you so much.
Oh, Bill, it's my pleasure. As I said to you when we hopped on this link getting ready to go live, happy ECCP update day. These don't come around. These don't come around that often. So when they do, it's a real opportunity, and it behooves all of us to jump right on it.
Well, to read the ECCP update in full, visit www.justice.gov. But also there is a direct link. That's frankly, the URL is too long for me to say eloquently. So we will provide a direct link to the update itself in this episode's show notes. And for our friends tuning in on LinkedIn Live, we'll make sure we put that in the thread there as well, if it's not there already. And for a wealth of helpful free resources on ethical culture, compliance program structure and authority, corporate governance, and more, please visit the Ethisphere Resource Center at ethisphere.com/resources. I'm Bill Coffin with Erica Salmon Byrne, and this has been a special live episode of the Ethicast. For more episodes, please visit the Ethisphere YouTube channel at youtube.com/Ethisphere. And if this is your first time enjoying the show, or if you're just tuning in for the first time live through LinkedIn, please make sure to like and subscribe on LinkedIn, but also on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Thank you so much for joining us on such short notice. And until next time, remember, strong ethics is good business. See ya.